today's speakers, and we have 3 of them today. Let me thank the Nebraska State Historical Society Foundation for funding the filming of these lectures. Their financial support allows us to film them through the auspices of the city and to broadcast the programs on public access television. So these programs reach a very wide audience, more than we could fit into this auditorium. Today's program is Treasures from the Collections of the Nebraska State Historical Society, and the speakers are going to introduce themselves. I will just tell you that they are all members of the curatorial team of the Nebraska State Historical Society. So I'll let them tell you who they are and what it is they do and what kinds of wonderful things they have to show you.
Thank you, Ann. I'm going to start out. My name is Paul Eisloeffel. I'm the curator of visual and audio materials here at the Historical Society. My colleagues and I have some fun things to share with you today. We're calling them treasures, and of course that's a relative term. The technical meanings of the term treasure are hoarded wealth, something of great worth or value, something rare or precious, or a collection of such precious things. Now, the word is used a lot, perhaps even overused, to mean the cream of the crop, the best of the best, the greatest hits. And what we have to show you today, treasures? Well, in a way. Certainly they are all unique examples from the tip of the iceberg that is the collections of the Nebraska State Historical Society. In any case, you are sure to enjoy them. Now, one more thing, some of our chosen items today pay homage to our upcoming exhibit, which is called Weird Nebraska, Strange Stories and Amazing Facts, which opens here in the Museum of Nebraska History in January 2006. Well, we have a lot of show and tell to get to today, so let's get right to it. The 3 of us will be alternating between museum objects, manuscript materials, and moving images.
Hello, my name is Deb Arenz, and I'm the Senior Museum Curator here, and I curate, along with my colleagues, the 3-dimensional objects, the museum collections, of which we have about 180,000 objects. I'm going to show you 5. So it's definitely the tip of the iceberg. And the objects that I'm going to show you today are actually relatively new acquisitions. So everything that you'll see today we've gotten within the last 3 years or so. And this is actually one of our newest acquisitions. This is a gown that was made by Fran Prahl of Waco, Nebraska for Stephanie Johans' appearance at the 1999 inaugural ball for her husband, Mike Johans, the newly elected governor of Nebraska, who is now also our Secretary of Agriculture. Mrs. Johans was in need of a dress for the ball and didn't know what she was going to do, and saw an article in the newspaper about Fran's sewing handiwork. And so she called her up out of the blue and asked her to design and sew a dress for her. And Fran recalled in a newspaper article that she honestly thought one of her friends was just calling to play a joke on her, because Fran actually does her sewing just out of her house. She's not sort of a professional dressmaker. Stephanie convinced her that she was serious, and then they designed this dress together. And Fran went to the governor's mansion the day of the ball and did the last fitting, and actually had dinner with the Johans that night at the pre-inaugural dinner, and then attended the ball herself. So it's kind of an interesting story to go along with this dress. Mrs. Johans then emailed me this picture, because I asked for a picture of her in her dress, and she didn't have one. But she did have this picture of her holding her First Lady doll. And it has the identical dress to her inaugural gown, which was also sewn by Fran Prahl. And it has Stephanie's actual hair, which was styled on the doll by the person who styled her hair for the ball. So this doll is actually not in our collection. It's in the collection at the governor's mansion with the other First Lady dolls. So.
Hello, my name is Tom Mooney, and I am the curator of manuscript collections for the Nebraska State Historical Society, which means basically all the private papers, personal and family papers, organizational records, and business records. And Most of the collections that I'll be talking about today are more recent acquisitions. I've only been with the Historical Society for about a year and a half now, and so a lot of these have come in since I've been working here. This first one is I received last year, and it's a letter written from Grace Tranbarger Koppel from Fullerton, Nebraska in 1915. And it's a letter that she wrote as a Christmas present to her father back in Indiana. And it's actually more of a travel diary because it accounts the trip that she and her husband and some friends from Fullerton made to the World's Fair in San Diego in 1915. And they left in June. And it's just a really interesting account of their travels and some of the difficulties that they experienced as they were traveling out to California. And as you can see, she illustrated her story with some photographs that they took along the way. And one of the major complaints that she talked about throughout this 125-page letter was the horrible road conditions and the weather that they experienced. And this shows, I think, somewhere outside of Kearney where one of the group got stuck and they had to be pulled out. She goes on, and there's a really great story in here that talks about traveling through the mountains. And at one point, there were 5 cars that were following along. And at one point, one of them didn't have enough power to get up the steep incline of the mountain road. So the other cars had to find a safe spot to pull off to the side, and then they got out and actually had to help push the car up the road. And someone actually carried a rock along with them in case they killed the engine and started rolling back, so they didn't want it to roll off the mountain. But they did manage to make it out to California to the World's Fair, and she illustrated this by putting in some postcards that she picked up along the way. But it's a really great story, and it's just really fun to read through, and some of the things that they were able to see on their way out there and on their way back. And it took them about a month to travel out there and to come back, so it was quite an interesting trip.
All right, me again, Paul Eisloeffel. I'm going to share some choice clips from our moving image collections. I'll be doing so pretty much chronologically as we go through these selections here. And while any or all of them may have some weirdness to them, certainly uniqueness, I'm saving all the really weird film clips we have for an entire brown bag that I'm going to have later in 2006. So be looking for that. But we'll start our film clips today in 1927, the year in which this Midwest News Review newsreel was made. This is some really terrific footage of the Omaha livestock market, once the nation's second largest. But the film gets really interesting when the commission workers attend a rodeo in Sidney, Iowa.
You know, Paul and I did this kind of talk about 2 years ago. I don't know if any of you were here. And I always had to follow Paul, who always had these really funny film clips, and I always felt kind of inadequate. So Here I go again, following Paul. This is a trophy that was made by the Heinz Art Metal Shop of Buffalo, New York in 1915, which was a fine metal shop and very nice products. And it's inscribed as follows: presented to Troop G, 12th U.S. Cavalry by the Black Hills Feature Film Company for the much appreciated services of the officers and enlisted men of Troop G in making the historical moving picture film of Wild Bill and Calamity Jane at Fort Robinson, Nebraska, August 1st to 12th, 1915. And the historical moving film that they're referring to is the film In the Days of 75 and 76, which was made primarily in Chadron and is one of the oldest known Nebraska-made motion pictures. And this film actually does reside in Paul's collection, so I'm going to show you a brief clip that he provided for us. This, and the cavalry is featured in this film clip. And from what Paul tells me, this is Wild Bill and Calamity Jane, and they are working as Indian scouts, and they have just realized a stagecoach will be coming under attack. And he also wanted me to note that the Native Americans you'll see in this film are actually from the Pine Ridge Reservation. Oh, did I stop? Oh, stopped it. Make it go back.
Go back. Go backwards.
Great, thanks.
Okay. And go.
Thank you.
Okay, the next collection I'm going to talk about is the Ernest Barney papers, and it's a fairly small collection, but it has some interesting items in it. Ernest Barney, he grew up in Lincoln and lived here all his life. He worked for the Hardy Furniture Company for many, many years, but also in the late 1940s, he started his own business when he invented and patented this gun saddle for outdoorsmen and hunters. And in the collection, there's some informational brochures and things like that. We also have the original patent document that was issued by the U.S. Patent Office to Mr. Barney. And he went on to do a kind of a multi-purpose one where it could be used for both hunting rifles and for fishing rods. So I don't know that it ever made him rich and famous, but it's just kind of an interesting thing. He was also an amateur baseball fan and was the manager of the Hardy's Furniture Company baseball team. And they were, as this flyer suggests, apparently one of the most popular amateur semi-pro clubs in Nebraska at the time. So there are also some other things in the collection relating to amateur baseball in Nebraska. And there's a really interesting letter from an umpire to Barney talking about his reasons why he had to eject a player from the game the weekend before because of some derogatory comments he made towards the umpire, which I won't get into now, but it's kind of an interesting letter to read through. So it just kind of gives you a little more information about the amateur baseball scene in Nebraska at the time. So it's kind of a fun little collection.
Here
Most of the stuff from the collection was from the 40s and 50s.
My next film clip is promotional in nature. In honor of the 20 millionth Ford car to come off the assembly line, the Ford Motor Company staged a promotional tour of the United States in 1931. The car, as it was known, stopped in several towns in Nebraska, and a Ford film crew was there to capture it all on film. These particular scenes show the car in Lincoln. Specifically on 13th Street here in downtown Lincoln. This is some of the best early footage we have showing downtown Lincoln street scenes. The other cars in the procession carry local publishers and Ford dealers. You see there that they presented them the car with a special Nebraska license plate with the number 20 million on it. And I don't know, but I imagine that logbook is somewhere either in the Ford Motor Company archives or the Ford Museum in Dearborn, Michigan.
Okay. This is an outfit that belonged to Tinky Tower, who was born Mildred Geraldine Tower in 1923 in Edison, Nebraska. Tinky was she was basically a trick rider, a trick horse rider, and she started riding before she could walk, apparently, is what the story goes, and started teaching herself how to trick ride at about the age of 7 or 8. And this is a photo of Tinky, and that's on her first trick pony, as her son called it, and her name was Pearl. And then there's another photo of Tinky, maybe a little bit older, doing a rope trick. In the mid-30s, Tinky headed to Texas to learn some more trick riding techniques, and then came back to Nebraska and performed in local parades and rodeos until after the end of World War II, when she started to tour the country with shows like Monty Montana's Wild West Show and the 101 Ranch Wild West Show also. There's an image of Tinky during her show days, and there's another one where she's standing on the horse. The shirt in this one we also have in the collection. It's quite a large collection that consisted of three-dimensional objects and also papers and photographs. Around 1948, she came back to Nebraska and was a solo act and followed the rodeo circuit. In this photo, she's actually wearing, let's see if my pointer will work, oh, the bottom photo. She's wearing the outfit that I showed you earlier. It's a little bit hard to tell, but when you look closely, you can see the flower appliques at the bottom of the pants and the big puffy shirts. And from the photos we have, I think that's the only one in the outfit that we have, but I'm glad that we have one at all. In 1951, she married Bob Phillipson in Holbrook, Nebraska, and then gave up the trick riding circuit and went into the livestock business with her husband. They owned livestock markets for about 25 years, and they ranched and farmed 4,000 acres in Furnace and Franklin counties. They were very active people. They were founding members of the National Simmental Association. They opened a western wear shop. They had 2 boys. They went to thoroughbred horse racing, and they were very active Republicans. And her son, who gave us a lot of information about her life, told a story I found a little interesting. They were both very active in the Republican Party, and in fact, her husband had gone on the road for a number of months to campaign for Goldwater. And then her Tinky's son said that Tinky was very active, like her husband in the party, staunch Republican until August of 1974, when she suddenly lost all interest in politics, and that was when Richard Nixon resigned. So I guess that makes sense. Unfortunately, Tinky and Bob lost most everything in the 70s and 80s, as a lot of people did, and eventually had to file bankruptcy. And she passed away in 1993.
This comes out of a collection that actually the Historical Society has had for a number of years. This is from the Louise Pound papers, who I'm sure many of you know. She was a well-respected member of the university faculty here in Lincoln for many years. She was a noted scholar. She was an accomplished athlete. She was really a Renaissance woman, basically, because she could do just about anything. She won numerous tournaments and championships in tennis and golf. She was an ice skater and a skier. She managed the women's basketball team for a while. So there's just a lot of really interesting things that she did. She was an accomplished musician. But one thing I didn't know about her until I came to work here at the Historical Society was that she was also an artist, and we have a number of her sketchbooks in the collection. Most of these were done probably when she was still attending school at the university in the early to mid 1890s. And she did a lot of building scenes, people, and landscapes. And most of them are not identified, but I would guess that they are probably from around the Lincoln area. The people are probably friends and family members. There are some other sketches later on from when she was going to school for her doctorate degree at the University of Heidelberg in Germany. And so there are a number of sketches from around Germany of different places that she had traveled to. So it's just a really fun collection. There's a lot of information in there about her activities, and just about the university and the things that were going on. And I believe she was at the university until 1945 when she retired, but it's a fairly substantial collection. It has a lot of information in there, and a lot of fun things like this. So it's just a great collection to look through.
Well, what do you do when the Missouri River freezes over? You make ice cubes, really big ice cubes. These are home movies of an icing operation on the Missouri near Brownville, shot by Brownville resident Frank Thomas in 1940.
Okay. The object that I'm showing you is actually on that side, the poem, the writing. It's pretty faded and it's kind of chicken scratch-ish, so I'll read it for you. There is an ancient Africa and one that's new. There's Cassius Clay and Muhammad Ali too. It was to help the former that I bopped the pair, which history calls the zapping in Zaire, the handwriting on George Foreman's wall. This item came from the estate of Barney Oldfield, who is this gentleman here, standing next to a young George Foreman, who is a Nebraskan. And Barney, I'll tell you a little bit about Barney in a bit, but Barney made a note on the poem to make sure we all knew what it was, and his note says, "It's faded now, but before George Foreman went to Africa, to Zaire, to fight Muhammad Ali, he wrote this for me to have copies made so they could be hung all around Kinshasa as a reminder of why he was there." So we got this as part of his estate, and I was curious as to the truth behind this story, if this poem was actually printed up and posted all around Kinshasa. So I contacted George Foreman, and he replied, and before you think that I'm incredibly well connected and regularly correspond with George Foreman, if you go to his website, he actually says, if you email me, I will email you back personally, and lo and behold, he does. So I asked him about this poem and actually sent him an image of it, and his response was quite interesting. He says, "It does sound like me, but I am not sure as I cannot remember. After that fight, my life so changed, I can hardly remember many things, my feelings these days. Just that fight. Barney was George more than me," and then he put a little smiley face. It makes sense. "I am sorry. I am not much help. We spent so much time together. I did love this wonderful man. Thanks, George Foreman." And the reason why that makes sense is Barney was a PR man, and he was a consummate PR man. And George is a consummate PR man, so I think what he was trying to say is Barney was an even more of a PR man than he was, which is saying something. And of course, the fight that we're referring to is the famous 1974 Rumble in the Jungle. And although George predicted that he would bop Muhammad Ali, that wasn't to be, and George himself got bopped. So I'll tell you a little bit about Barney, who has quite an illustrious resume. He was born in Tecumseh in 1909. He was an entertainment reporter for KFOR and the Lincoln Journal. He was a movie reviewer for Variety magazine and an Army PR man and intelligence officer for the 505th Parachute Infantry Regiment. He started the Press Club of Berlin in 1945, and for a while after World War II, he was a PR man for Warner Brothers, and he had clients like Ronald Reagan, Errol Flynn, and Elizabeth Taylor. From 1954 to 1962, he served as the Command Information Officer for the North American Air Defense Command and Continental Air Defense Command, commonly known as NORAD. And then in 1963, he began a 27-year career with Litton Industries in Beverly Hills. And that's actually how he met George Foreman, because Litton was involved with the Job Corps, which gave entry-level jobs to disadvantaged youth and high school dropouts. And George entered that program through Litton, and they met in the 1960s and were friends throughout the rest of Barney's life. And Barney passed away in 2003.
Okay, the next collection I'm going to talk about here is the Lenovo Realty Company collection. And this company is the company that started the Lenovo Beach Resort, located between Lincoln and Omaha, and that's how it got its name, Lenovo, is because it's halfway between Lincoln and Omaha. It's a really fun collection in that sometimes you'd think business records are not all that interesting, and we do have that. There are financial information in the collection, but there's also various promotional materials like these pamphlets and flyers promoting the resort, and it was really big in its heyday in the 20s and 30s. I believe it was started in 1924, and so there are materials like this. It had a dance hall, and so there are lots of little items from the different bands and groups that came there to perform. There were a lot of big bands like this, but also vaudeville acts and things like that. And so it kind of gives you a feel for the kind of entertainment that was going on at the time. And it was well known enough that there was bus and train schedules that they would stop there to let people on and off at Lenovo Beach. You can see there's the train schedule there. It can tell you like when it'll stop. There's also a letter in the collection from the railroad to the managers of Lenovo Beach telling them, because they wouldn't always necessarily stop there unless they made arrangements ahead of time, but if there were people at Lenovo Beach that wanted to get onto the train, they could send someone out with flags to try and flag down the train to let them know to stop so they could pick up passengers. Also in the collection, there are daily attendance reports, which are kind of interesting, that have it broken down between like the number of men and number of women that came to Lenovo Beach each day. And some days nothing was happening. There was no one there. Some days it was just a handful. But I saw a few reports where there was probably well over 600 people that came that day. And they also had some revenue reports that listed the amount of money that they made off of certain things because of different services that they provided to the people, including a towel service. They rented out bathing suits, which I don't know if that was a big money maker for them, but you could rent a bathing suit there if you wanted to. They had a bathhouse and some other different things. They had a cafe there, and so there was a lot of stuff going on there at the time. And before anyone asks, I'm not sure when the lighthouse was built there. I didn't find that in the collection, but I'm sure that we could try and track that down for you. But this is just another interesting collection that kind of shows what was going on at the time and the different entertainment options that were in the area.
And it occurs to me we do have some home movies in our collections of people frolicking at Lenovo Beach in the early 30s. Okay, what's happening here in Ainsworth? Is it some sort of seditious invasion or martial law? Well, no. In fact, it's the aftermath of the famous Blizzard of '49, which was actually a series of blizzards in rapid succession from the fall of 1948 into the winter of '49. As part of the relief effort known as Operation Snowbound, the U.S. Fifth Army was called in to clear roads and get provisions to people and livestock. And the Army also sent a camera crew to capture it all on film. These scenes show relief efforts around Ainsworth and O'Neill at the beginning of February 1949. And happy campers once again, ready to live through the rest of the winter.
Okay, the next series of slides I'm going to show you are all items that are part of a larger collection that we got that relates to the military career of Charles R. Joe Sterling, who was raised near Weeping Water, Nebraska, and joined the U.S. Navy in the late 1950s. In January 1968, Sterling was a crew member on the USS Pueblo, which was a Navy vessel, an intelligent vessel that was captured by the North Koreans. One sailor was killed, and the remaining 82 crew members, including Sterling, were incarcerated in North Korea for 11 months. After his release, Sterling continued his naval career and actually retired after 30 years with the military. He died in 2002, and we obtained this collection shortly thereafter. This crew photo here is the whole crew prior to, or part of the crew at least, prior to them embarking, and my pointer's not working, but Sterling is in there. He's kind of behind the guy's high-peaked hat, so you can see part of his face. On the bottom is his Geneva Convention identification card, and then the top photo is a number of the crew in captivity, and Sterling is actually this one. And if you look closely, the crew members sitting on the bottom are giving a not-so-subliminal salute, if you will, indicating their displeasure with the situation. And if you read a little bit about the Pueblo, you learn that they, in giving this salute, as you will, they'd come up with a way to trick the North Koreans. If they were ever asked about it, they were going to call it the Hawaiian good luck sign. So there's a Mr. Sterling shortly after his release, obviously a little worse for wear. We have his Prisoner of War medal. In fact, the Pueblo crew wasn't didn't receive their prisoner of war medals until the 80s, 1980s, because for a long time the military only considered them detainees, not POWs. His National Defense Medal, and then on the bottom is a plank owner plaque. That's not an official Navy commendation, it's unofficial, but if you write to the curators at the Naval Historical Center, they'll actually, if they have it, issue you a piece of the plank. So people who are on a commissioned vessel could get a piece of the plank as a plank owner. And then this is a print of a watercolor of the Pueblo, and it was done by the Pueblo's commander, Lloyd Bucher. And another interesting connection to Nebraska is that Bucher was actually raised at Boys Town. And the print is inscribed for Mr. Sterling. It's inscribed for Charles Joe Sterling. Well done. Proud of your service, L.M. Bucher. It's really a fascinating story. The 40th anniversary is coming up in 2 years now. And if you're interested in learning more about the Pueblo, there are many books, but you might also check out a website. It's just www.usspueblo.org, and it's run by the Pueblo Veterans Association. There's lots of reminiscences and the like, and a lot of great information.
This next collection is another recent acquisition within the last year. Most of the collection relates to the reminiscences of this family. It's a family collection, the Grasmick family from Scottsbluff, Nebraska. And the reminiscences are of one of the daughters talking about just what the family did. They immigrated from Russia and settled in Scottsbluff in 1912. And some of the things that she talks about are a little bit depressing to read through, but a lot of things happened to the family. The father, Henry Grasmick, he came over first to find work, and then when he could afford to, he brought the rest of his family over to America. But on the voyage over, his youngest son at the time became ill and died. And so there was no way for them to notify him ahead of time, and so he didn't find out until he actually went to pick up the family. So that was kind of sad. But they moved around a bit. They lived in Colorado and Wyoming, and he'd worked for a farmer for a while until he got enough money where he could buy some land and do some farming on his own. But within the first year, he had planted a crop and everything was looking good, but then a big hailstorm came through and wiped everything out. And so the next year he replanted, and then a tornado came through and destroyed his barn, and they lost a lot there. So not soon after, a little after that, they decided to move. I wonder why. But when they settled down again, they started farming, and within a year or so, their house burned down, and they lost everything. But finally, they ended up settling in Scottsbluff, and things seemed to turn around for them there. But I just pulled a couple of things out of this collection that are a little more interesting to look at, in that this was done by the father, by Henry Grasmick. He was a religious man, and I don't know if you can see this, but everything on here, it's written in German. They were Germans from Russia. And this is apparently, I don't read German, but I had a volunteer of mine that reads German. He was able to translate some of it for me and told me that basically this is a history of the universe from the creation through the end of time. And most of this is based on the book of Revelations in the Bible. And this is all hand done, and he illustrated it, and it's just really fascinating, some of the things that he talks about in here. If you can see this area right here, that's actually done in red ink. That is the Lake of Fire, which it's reserved for those whose names aren't listed in the Book of Life, are cast into the Lake of Fire at the Second Coming. So it's just a really interesting document to look at, and I don't have a complete translation as of yet, but I'm hoping that's something I can do in the near future, is have a complete translation done of this. Then this next item, it's another chart, another history that he did that goes into a little bit more detail on the age of mankind and and the things that mankind was supposed to go through until the end of time. So it's just a really interesting little thing that we found in the collection that's kind of fun.
You just have to wonder if there's any connection there between Lenovo Beach and the Lake of Fire, or was that just coincidental? I don't know. Okay, now World War II trained a whole generation of filmmakers who worked mostly for the military, and that last clip, Operation Snowbound, is a good example of their work. That was shot by the Army Signal Corps. Consequently, after the war, all of these people who knew how to make motion pictures went hither and yon to ply their new trade, and lots of promotional films resulted. This next clip is from a 1953 film called This Is Our Town, Syracuse, which extols the virtues of that Nebraska town. This clip from the film is about the Syracuse Sausage Company, and it's one of my favorite examples of 1950s film kitsch. This does have sound to it. Previous to this, of course, all the clips have been silent. I defy you to listen to the narration of this clip with a straight face.
Let's look in as the Syracuse Sausage Company makes wieners. Step number 1 is the grinding of grade A beef cheeks. The cheeks, carefully inspected before being passed for Syracuse sausage, are fed to this grinder, which grinds the beef into the first rough stock. In the mixer, step number 2, spices and seasoning are added to the rough wiener stock. The formula is the Syracuse sausage secret. The rough stock and seasoning are found in a well-mixed formula. And then to the chopper. This machine beats the wiener stock into a smooth batter substance. The batter is easiest to handle when ready to insert into the skins on the stuffer. Each process is carefully timed and catalogued. Wiener batter is taken to the stuffer, and here cut skins are filled with the batter, and the wiener begins to take rough shape. It is United States government inspected. When filled, the skins are passed to the twisters who twist individual wieners. This is an art in itself and takes a little while to learn. And then to the smokehouse for that final touch of flavoring. Here, smoking is a day's production of the old-fashioned bologna, the Syracuse sausage specialty. Controlled smoking and seasoning processes make Syracuse sausage one of the most popular sausage names in the country. And to the cooler after smoking goes the day's production. Here the trucks will gather the day's output of smooth, mouth-watering sausage delight. The trucks will pick up their day's consignment here and will move from town to town with goodwill and good Syracuse sausage.
I never thought in my life I'd hear a phrase like the art of wiener twisting, but then I started working here. So none of my objects up till now have been weird or strange or, well, they've all been interesting, but not weird or strange. And so this is my one weird Nebraska Strange Stories and Amazing Facts object, which, by the way, opens on Friday, January the 13th, appropriately enough. It's weird to look at. It just is weird. It's a large papier-mâché rat head that's been mounted like a trophy animal. And it was actually made by James Lewis, who is director of the Lincoln Recreation Board, for a 1936 holiday pageant parade float. I don't know which float was for. And after the parade was over, apparently he thought it would be funny to mount the rat head as a trophy and present it to his friend Ruth Lee Holloway. So the plaque on the bottom says "Shot by Ruth Lee Holloway" and has the date of the parade. So Ruth Lee Holloway has the distinct privilege of being the shooter of probably the largest rodent in Lincoln ever. So I hope you come to Weird Nebraska too. It should be a fun exhibit.
Okay, this is my last collection I'm going to talk about, and this too relates somewhat to the whole weird Nebraska thing, although these aren't specific to Nebraska, but as you can see here, this is a letter from John Neihart to a friend of his, and this comes from the collection of John Thomas Richards, who was a student in Missouri and had seen Neihart do a lecture and became really interested in his work, and so he corresponded with him and developed a friendship. This letter that Neihart sent to Mr. Richards is talking about his ghost dog story, which Neihart was into spiritualism and mysticism, and so was Richards. And so in this account, Neihart talks about a summer where he was living in South Dakota. He had rented a cabin for the summer, and shortly after he moved in, a local sheepdog showed up at his door that was owned by a neighbor and was really friendly and just wanted to stay with Neihart. And Neihart talks about trying to convince the dog that he didn't own him and he should probably go home to his owner, but the dog wouldn't listen. So finally, he brought the dog back to the owner and tried to, have him take him back. But the owner said, "Well, I don't want to really tie him up, and if he wants to go with you, I'm not going to stop him. So if you don't mind, you can take him back to your cabin." So he did, and he kept the dog there over the summer. But every so often, Neihart would do some traveling. He would take the train and go off for like a week or so, and the dog would get very upset that the train was taking him away and would go out and bark at the train every time. But everything was fine once Neihart came back, and the dog was very happy again. Well, by the end of the summer, Neihart was leaving, and so when he left and didn't return the next week, the dog became very upset apparently and ran out onto the tracks to bark at the train and was killed. And this was relayed to Neihart by a friend that actually witnessed this, apparently. Well, the story goes that about 60 years later, Neihart goes back to South Dakota to visit the area, to visit friends, and goes back to the same area where the cabin was. And as he was walking along, a sheepdog comes running up to him and starts licking him and is just being very friendly. And I guess the owner of the dog sees this and comes out and kind of apologizes for his dog, but he said it's kind of a strange thing because he's not like that with strangers, so he doesn't know why he's doing that. And so Neihart, he didn't actually say that this was some sort of reincarnation of this dog, but it was just kind of an interesting story that he told. And then this next item, I didn't scan the entire thing, it's just the title of this article that Mr. Richards wrote about these experiments that Neihart did at Skyrim Farm, which is where he lived in Missouri. Neihart was really into the power of the mind and being able to move things with the mind, telekinesis and that sort of thing. And so he would have a small group of people come out to his farm, and they would sit around and they would try and do these experiments to see what would happen. And throughout this article, he talks about one evening they were there and they had a little metal TV tray set up, and they were kind of all standing around and concentrating on it, or however they did it, I don't know. But apparently the TV tray would raise off the ground and float back down again, and it did that several times. And then it started kind of walking its way across the floor. He said it went through the living room and into the kitchen. It somehow went down the stairs to the basement, across the basement floor, and into the garage. And of course, I guess this group was following it at the time. And then it leapt up on top of one of the cars that was parked in the garage and did a little dance, and then slid down and slammed into the garage door. Well, someone had the idea of opening up the garage door, so they did, and then it started walking down the driveway out into the street. So, I mean, it's a really interesting story, and apparently he talks about in this article that there was an audio tape that was made at the time, and he said whenever he listens to it, he still gets goosebumps remembering what had happened that night. Unfortunately, we don't have that audio tape in our collections. I'm not sure where that ended up, if it existed at all, but it's just kind of an interesting story. And it's something that you'll see similar sorts of things in the Weird Nebraska exhibit that'll be opening next month. So hopefully you'll come back and take a look at what kind of stories we have specific to Nebraska.
Nor do we have any film footage of that dancing TV tray. I wish we did. My last offering, actually the last offering of this presentation in general, is actually two clips from television station KOLN here in Lincoln, which started broadcasting in 1953. This first one is a news promo from the early 1960s.
More to reporting news than meets the eye, and channels 10 and 11 do it best.
Rather strangely graphic there. Some of you may remember KOLN's cartoon show host, Sheriff Bill, and if you do, you'll like this early public service announcement.
Well, hi, boys and girls. This is Salvador right here, and I'm Sheriff Bill. Say, do you know who was one of the bravest men in the world? Well, it was Daniel, because he wasn't afraid to go into the lion's den. And you know who was the strongest man in the world? Well, that was Samson. He was so strong that he could pull down buildings. And you know who was called the giant killer? It was a young boy named David. He killed a giant named Goliath with a stone and a slingshot. Well, all these exciting true stories you can learn in Sunday school, plus many, many more. And that's why we say it's fun to go to Sunday school. You learn so much about the great men and women of the Bible. So this very morning, why don't you go to Sunday school? There's still time to get ready. Ask Mom and Dad to take you. And remember, the greatest stories ever told come from the Bible.
And that concludes our presentation. If you have any questions or comments for any of us, come on in here. Now would be the time, but we do thank you for coming. Are there any questions, comments? Roxanne?
I just had a question. You showed pictures of the Blizzard of 49. Is there any pictures of the Blizzard of 1888 in your collection?
Not that I'm aware of. We do have a lot of reminiscences from that blizzard, but actual photographic images, not aware of those, no. Yes, ma'am.
The San Diego trip, is there a possibility to publish that?
About the reminiscence from Grace Tranbarger Koppel, I guess I'm not sure. It was received from a family member, but I don't know about copyright on that. I will have to check with the family. But it's an interesting story, and it really, I think, should be, published in an article or something. I mean, it's just a really great story. So, hopefully, maybe working with our research and publications department or something, maybe eventually we will try and get something like that published, because it would be really fun to see in print, I think. Yes?
Comment on your snow, when the Army came in with their little trams and did that.
Yes.
My uncle was a civilian colonel, and his job in Chicago, he was head of 5th Army Transportation Division.
So there were your uncle was involved then in the relief efforts.
Yeah.
They called those vehicles, weasels, little kind of half-track type things. And, yeah. Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, well, we do appreciate you coming, and be sure to come see our Weird Nebraska exhibit starting next month. Thank you very much.